that time, I became aware that DeKalb County at any given time, we have 4,700 vouchers out there to individuals who have been approved for affordable housing. So they didn't have the right and ability to go out, secure housing, and we can move them into that housing. However, currently in DeKalb County, we have a waiting list of 45,000 people who have indicated a need for affordable housing. So this issue is far greater than we have the capacity as a governmental municipality to solve. We're going to need partners. We're going to need people who take up the mantle of helping us in the development of affordable housing. Now, for those who are listening who may be familiar with CDBG funds, community development, block grants, and other resources, as a general rule, in order to receive such funding, it only requires a 10% set aside. So if you're building 100 units, you're only getting 18 for affordable housing. That's not enough. So what I'd like to do, in particular, the reason I reach out to faith-based is because in many instances, and I will say I'm a Southern Baptist, we're not here to talk about religion. I understand there's a separation between church and state. But I will say, take executive privilege, that I come from a long line of Southern Baptist ministers and folk who fought in the civil rights movement. And the one thing that I can say in my infinite wisdom is that everything great that happened that was revolutionary in change for communities, as a general rule, it came from the church. Churches have an extreme capacity and resources that the average person generally does not. So what my call is to walk you through this process. So that first you understand the need, and secondly, you understand the process. If you are willing to join us in this effort to help develop affordable housing, because it is a revolutionary need. So this is not something that we're asking you to do, or we're asking you to take care of. We're asking you to join us in providing needed homes, needed apartments, and communities for individuals. So I want to help also set the tone for what we are experiencing. So at this point, Leah, I would ask that we have a 5-minute video that I'd like to show. And we're going to watch that video, and then we'll move into the introduction of speakers. It's just a background. What you're going to see in this video is the lack of inventory, the high demand. Last evening, interest rates rose again. You'll see that the Federal Reserve is now taking actions to slow spending. I was a little shocked yesterday morning because I always watch CNN infinitely. And there was a discussion of what is called so much spending in America as we are in the middle of a global pandemic. Now, for many of you, the checks may not have reached your house, because they certainly didn't buy Commissioner Johnson. But there was great discussion given to how much money and subsidies that were given to individuals during the pandemic, creating for many a disposable income in which they have not had tradition because of the calculations that were done by the federal government in determining what was necessary to keep the economy afloat. So during that time, we saw a great deal of spending take place. But of course, because of supply chain issues.
Yeah, but I'm supposed to be sharing the screen from here so people can also see. So it's just, I know.
So now what you're finding, of course, is there's a huge demand as many workers shift from traditional workplaces into homes. You also see, of course, millennials versus baby boomers, because the millennials are now seeking homes. Cost of land has also risen. And also, one of the biggest issues that we're facing is Wall Street and private investors. Because if you live in DeKalb County, Georgia, 57% of homes that were purchased south of Memorial Drive that are zoned residential were not purchased by single families, but by LLCs, private investors, and Wall Street. And here in DeKalb County, over 12,000 were purchased by a company called Invitation Homes, which is one of the three largest private equity firms. There's also a huge build to rent, BTR movement that's taking place. Builders are no longer building to sell, they build to rent. So what you're seeing is a shift in our communities. So many of these homes, once they're acquired, they become pad splits. Now, what is a pad split? A pad split is a home that is taken and it has 5 bedrooms. They now rent each bedroom in the home. And this often will shift the entire community. As you're seeing certain communities being targeted and inventory being bought there at a far higher rate. I don't think I hear background music, Leah, so are we ready now to go into video? If we could just take it back and start it and do full screen and turn up our volume before we start so that we can make sure. That set the tone for what we're about to discuss. You'll notice in the video it discusses everything from the private investors that are coming in, the local inventory that we're experiencing, and the rise in home and rental costs. In Metro Atlanta, we see a 20% increase overall in rent. And what you're finding with the acquisition of homes in general is that because, and it's interesting, they call it the institutional market. Because what's happening is investors are buying up homes and they're creating an entire institution. And they are charging far more for these homes than an individual would if they would buy the home and pay the general mortgage. Now, the real imbalance comes when you hear again and again, now more and more. The investors have an algorithm, and as soon as a home hits the market, they know it. Most homes sell within now less than 3 to 5 days. It's gone. And with the all-cash offers, what you're finding, the imbalance even for communities, and I would also say for the purpose of even our tax, these cash offers are not done by individuals, by law. It's by law and investors that have their own financial institutions. Because if an individual shows up to purchase a home, we've all been through the process. It's going to require that there is an appraisal done, and a bank will not lend more than the appraised value. So you have investors who have the ability to pay above market value. So it creates an imbalance in the system. I'm going to read to you a document here that I created. It's a resolution of the governing authority of DeKalb County, Georgia, to acknowledge an affordable housing crisis in DeKalb County and call upon federal, state, and local legislators and elected officials to pass legislation supporting home ownership and rent stabilization. Whereas nationally, there is a shortage of more than 7 million affordable homes for the nation's 10.8 million extremely low-income families, and 70% of the extremely low-income families are severely cost-burdened, paying more than half their income on rent. And whereas Georgia is currently ranked number 7 in the top 10 worst states for affordable housing by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. And whereas higher rents are a national phenomenon, and in 2021, rental rates rose in 48 of the nation's 50 largest metro cities, with the average monthly cost of a 1-bedroom apartment in Georgia rising more than 20% in 2021. And whereas the single-family rental industry first emerged as a new site of institutional investment in the aftermath of the 2008 housing foreclosure crisis, as millions of Americans across the country lost their homes and investment firms began accumulating thousands of distressed properties across the country. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic sparked a secondary surge in demand for the single-family residential asset class, drawing interest from a wide range of investors who are developing a new business model and partnerships to acquire homes in residential communities for high profits in 4 major markets, including Georgia. And whereas at least 50 billion of investors in capital transactions were invested in the single-family residential sector between March 2020 and January 2022, that removed single-family homes from the marketplace and transitioned them to the home for lease market, thereby shifting the dynamics of communities, primarily by invitation homes, American Homes for Rent, Tricon Residential, and Front Yard Residential for the 4 leading operators. Whereas investments by Wall Street and private investors are creating a structural advantage enjoyed by corporate landlords and amplifies the inequities endemic to capitalistic housing systems as investors aggressively pursue build-for-rent strategies through acquiring land and constructing single-family residential homes for rent. And whereas the rent set by these leading operators are on average higher than the fair market value in the metro Atlanta region, almost 500,000 people who are defined as low-income workers make $1,250 a month or less and spend over 30% of their income on housing to make rental payments. Whereas research shows housing is the key to reducing intergenerational poverty and increasing economic mobility, as access to affordable housing is the most cost-effective strategy for eliminating childhood poverty and increasing economic mobility in the United States. Whereas data shows that the shortage of affordable housing costs the American economy about $2 trillion annually in lower wages and productivity, and it slows the gross domestic product, while increasing access to affordable housing will boost your economic growth and increase earnings. Now, this just outlines the problem in its totality. This is a resolution that I presented here in DeKalb. Now we're going to the solution, and that's where you come in. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the governing authority of DeKalb County as follows. The governing authority of DeKalb County declares the lack of availability of affordable housing and affordable housing crisis. And the governing authority of DeKalb County seeks to foster greater transparency of property ownership and rentals through the creation of a rental registry that enables researchers and policymakers to study and understand the business practices of corporate landlords so counties can respond with appropriate measures. And the governing authority of DeKalb County wishes to implement broad-based tenant protections as the growing rental affordability challenges point to the need for nationwide broad-based tenant protections to limit rental increases, ancillary fees, and fines to promote security of tenure to ensure that the property rights of landlords do not take priority over the fundamental role of housing in supporting life, safety, and welfare of all citizens. And the governing authority of DeKalb County will consider limiting the market share of corporate landlords through legislation. As policymakers explore these possibilities to decentralize their expansion, stabilize the market rent, and increase the pool of homes available for purchases by first-time home buyers and families. Now, there's 2 other things that this resolution discusses, because currently when you're receiving certain types of loans, the Federal Housing Administration, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac, it limits your ability to purchase properties that may be in need of rehab. I wish to see that expanded so that first-time home buyers have the opportunity to purchase and receive a rehab loan combined into one property, because that is a very valuable sector. And last but not least, I want to see the development of affordable housing through creative efforts, and that's where you all come in. Now, I know I've said a lot, but it needs to be said. So I'll also make sure each one of you have a resolution. Lee, at this time, let's go directly into the introduction of the panel members. Thereafter, we're going to stop, allow you to eat, and then we'll pick up. And if you will, Leah, what is the passcode that I need here in order to enter? All right, and we can go away from me as soon as she sits down. I see me back here. You all know me, I'm the super district commissioner. I don't care where you live in DeKalb County. I represent each and everybody, but according to the boundaries of which I operate. I have everything from Doraville to Tucker, Stone Mountain, Stonecrest, Livonia, Pine Lake, unincorporated DeKalb, as well as Ellery. We also have with us today, I see he's in the room, Mr. Dorain DeBarr. Dorain is the president of Decide DeKalb Development Authority, and he has accumulated a long list of accomplishments since assuming this role. Since his first day, he's been hard at work. He has since recognized Decide DeKalb, reorganized Decide DeKalb, and paved the way for historic growth across the 24-month period with DeKalb County, with $1.8 billion in capital investments and more than 8,800 new and retained jobs across 2019 and 2020. Since DeBarr joined Decide DeKalb, revenue has increased by 350%. Thank you for joining us, Mr. DeBarr. Next, we have Ms. Bambie Hayes-Brown, PhD, Dr. Bambie Hayes-Brown. She is a native of Cordell, Georgia, and a graduate of Shore University with both a bachelor's in business management and in MBA, and obtained her Doctor of Divinity degree in 2020. Bambie is a 2018 graduate of the Atlanta Regional Commission's Regional Leadership Institute and the Georgia Academy of Economic Development. She is the president and CEO of Georgia Advancing Communities Together, a statewide membership organization of housing and community development agencies. She has 24 years experience in rural and urban housing, community and economic development. Thank you so much for having the time to be with us, Ms. Hayes-Brown. Next, we have Alfaro. He is a speaker, author, investor, and he is the CEO of Common Law, a real estate investment firm dedicated to affordable housing. He is also a real estate licensee in the state of Georgia, has owned up to 92 rental doors and managed 3 warehouse renovations and 73 flip deals across both residential and commercial sectors by the tender age of 31. Thank you, Ivan, for joining us. Also today on our panel, we will have Pastor Lee. Lee came to the Atlanta area as a 17-year-old teenager. After having lived in 7 cities, Lee knows that God has called him to serve the community. I will also note that he is the former interim CEO of DeKalb County, Georgia, and a former commissioner. His life has been an amazing story of God's grace, from Clark Atlanta University as a business major to Emory University to obtain a master's degree in theology, to launching a business of his own, to being in policy for over 10 years. Life for Lee has been all about service, and he has embarked upon the journey of working alongside me and the clergy to expand affordable housing partnerships. So thank you so much, Pastor May, for joining us. And at this time, we'll take a short break. Please report to the back to receive your lunch, and within 10 minutes, we will begin. Okay, if we could bring down the sound, we're going to move forward at this time. I think everyone, I see we have a few new faces that are coming in. Thank you so much for attending. And at this time, we're going to move into the program. I want to keep us going because there's a lot of great information. We want to have the time for questions and answers. And at this time, we will have Mr. Dorain DeBarr to talk about what is affordable housing. Thank you so much. I know you're busy. You're doing great things in DeKalb, and we're proud to have you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Never too busy for you. Good morning, everyone. There's a lot of great people in the room today, and hopefully online as well. Got some old friends, old faces in here. And I just want, before I get started, just want to say thank you to Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson for your continued leadership, vision, and just thoughtfulness with respect to making DeKalb County a better place. Seminars like this are amazing and absolutely necessary and needed. So thank you as always. As stated, my name is Dorain DeBarr. I'm president of Decide DeKalb Development Authority. We are responsible for economic development in DeKalb County. So what does that mean? We're responsible for business attraction, retention, and expansion. We want to make sure businesses come to DeKalb County. We want to make sure businesses have what they need to expand in DeKalb County, more employees, higher wages, and we want to make sure businesses grow in DeKalb County and stay. So that's about our retention efforts. We do a great job with respect to that. As Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson mentioned, we are responsible for over $1 billion in new capital investments in DeKalb County since 2019. That's a phenomenal mark, and we're continuing to hit that mark even more this year. So we've got a lot of great stories, and I would say, before I move any further, that Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson had a lot to do with that. So thank you again for your leadership on that front. So I've been charged with stating what is affordable housing. So before I get there, I want to tie it into what I do every single day. So again, I mentioned attraction and expansion. When we're talking to these companies, they want to make sure one of their first questions is, do we have the workforce? All right, we have to have the workforce. We worked with a very large employee recently, not too far from here actually. And their first question was, does DeKalb County have the workforce in order for us to make this targeted large expansion? And we were able to answer that question, yes. So this is why affordable housing is important, because we have to have folks living near and close to these jobs. If not, employers don't want to need them. All right, so keep that in mind. So what is affordable housing? So let me give you all this formal definition, which I think is important, and then we'll go beyond that. So affordable housing is housing which is deemed affordable to those with a household income at or below the area median income. So I'm gonna say that one more time. Affordable housing is housing which is deemed affordable to those with a household income at or below the area median income. All right, so basically that means affordable housing is housing that's available to those good, hardworking folks here in DeKalb County. All right, we just have to have housing that's available for all. So I'm gonna give you all some stats that kind of help put this into a broader picture. DeKalb County has an area median income, if I say that, we call it short for AMI in the housing world. DeKalb County has an AMI of $65,116 per year. So what does that mean? So you take DeKalb County, all these smart folks, they understand what people make in DeKalb County, their household income, and they put everybody on a chart, an Excel document, and say, all right, we only have 760,000. So 53% of that residents
This is
paying
next.
more than 30% of their income on housing, which is a fundamental problem. It's something that needs to solve. And I want to kind of say how that all the kids are trying affordable housing. Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson and all the other experts will speak to why it's important and what we need to change. But it's definitely a fundamental problem in DeKalb County, across this country, to be quite honest. But again, it's thank you for the leadership of this year, and we're here to talk about this today. It's all solutions here at home. So again, affordable housing is just giving our citizens a chance and opportunities and a higher quality of life. That is extremely important. And affordable housing equals to being able to live, their opportunities, access to healthy places, healthy food, healthy activities for your children, and quality of life. So that's what affordable housing is. My organization, we are passionate about this. It is not particularly our lane every single day, but we're making it our issue because it's important to get that. So with that, thank you all for your time. I hope I was able to define affordable housing for you all. And am I taking questions or am I just rolling on? If you have questions, you can. All right, let's do a good job. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. I need to leave this so I can stay on task here. Thank you so much for that definition.
Good day. My name is Dr. Bambie Hayes-Brown, and I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of Georgia Advancing Communities Together. And I apologize for not being with you today, but I'm pleased to bring you this recording on this year's federal and state legislative session. Georgia Advancing Communities Together, also known as Georgia ACT, is a statewide membership organization that represents the state's nonprofit, housing, and community development organizations. Our mission is to build, support, and inform a statewide network of thriving organizations, professionals, and individuals advancing equitable housing and community development. And our vision is for all Georgia families to have safe and decent housing in vibrant neighborhoods. Our 2022 policy agenda consisted of strengthening housing stability for low-income renters facing eviction by providing written notice and pre-eviction filings right to cure, to support a joint House and Senate study committee to prevent childhood-led poisoning, to ensure protection of current funding levels essential for housing and restore funds for housing vouchers for people with severe and persistent mental illness, to protect the state low-income housing tax credit, and also to support enabling legislation to allow local communities to choose access to new revenue sources and dedicate those funds for local affordable housing needs. To establish and fund a state housing trust fund with a dedicated revenue stream to meet the needs of Georgians around the state, to increase funds for the state housing trust fund for the homeless, to establish additional permanent housing options, to enable local communities to use zoning, tax, and financial incentives to support preservation and the development of housing that meets the needs of families across the economic spectrum, and to maximize Georgia's access to federal funding that supports affordable housing and rental assistance. I'd like to take a brief moment to go back to 2019 legislation that was passed and signed by the governor effective July 1st, 2019. This is House Bill 346, Healthy Housing. This very important bill protects renters against retaliation from landlords if they complain to code enforcement for unhealthy or unsafe living conditions. And DeKalb County set the precedent for this legislation by having a renter to actually use House Bill 346 as a defense, and it worked in her favor. For the 2022 legislative session, we had House Bill 408, introduced by Sharon Cooper, which would have required a written notice and 7-day right to cure the default. Most of the times it is due to non-payment before filing an eviction that would have brought Georgia in line with 40 other states. This did not pass. There was House Bill 1355, introduced by Katie Dempsey, It updates and strengthens the state standards for identifying childhood-led poisoning and abatement obligations for rental property, schools, and daycare centers where children under the age of 6 has an elevated blood lead level and a lead hazard is identified. And this did pass this year. Senate Bill 491, introduced by Senator Gail Davenport, would have created an authority and Department of Banking and Finance to create a program for tax advantage qualified down payment savings account similar to a 529 higher education accounts. So whoever contributes to that down payment assistance fund would get the tax benefit, and the individual would be able to save and purchase a home. And that program would be used in combination with the Georgia Dream program. Unfortunately, it did not pass. House Bill 1577 by Representative Viola Davis would have enacted local legislation for DeKalb County that would have imposed a fee of up to $150 for owners to pay for the cost of removal of personal property of any items left on the street for more than 5 days after the execution of an eviction. That did not pass. There was also House Bill 894, introduced by Representative William Bodie. It would have given prospective tenants, they could not be refused a rental solely based on a previous eviction due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, that did not pass. There was House Bill 1458, introduced by Representative Spencer Fry, that would have amended the state's Fair Housing Act to include source of income discrimination, and that includes people who hold a Section 8 voucher, as well as discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, in addition to existing protections. That did not pass. There was also Senate Bill 439 from Representative Lindsay Tippins that would have given property owners the right to appear in court dispossessory proceedings through an agent rather than personally or through an attorney. And fortunately, this did not pass because renters, they have to appear in person. So we think it's only fair that landlords have to appear in person or through their attorney. There's also House Bill 1393 from Representative Josh Bonner that would have exempt or excluded dispossessory proceedings from a state of judicial proceedings in a judicial emergency. So in other words, when the COVID-19 pandemic first happened, then Chief Justice Melton issued a judicial emergency which halted eviction proceedings in the state of Georgia due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So should we experience another health crisis or pandemic, we want the state of Georgia to have the power to put a stay to judicial proceedings as it relates to evictions. There was also much talk about homelessness. There was House Bill 713, introduced by Katie Dempsey, and Senate Bill 535, introduced by Carden Summers. And both the Senate and the House version would have prohibited the use of federal funds for supportive housing. In other words, redirected those funds into local encampments that would have included porta potties, water, security, and would have also penalized cities that failed to reduce the homelessness count, as well as enabling anti-sleeping or anti-campment bans, possibly giving homeless individuals a misdemeanor if they were camping or sleeping on federal property. Thankfully, neither one of those bills passed. However, there was HR 659 that did pass. It creates a study committee to assess different policies in reducing street homelessness and solicit inputs from groups and develop recommendations on the enforcement of bans in camping and sleeping in public places and the necessity for dealing with new state laws and the homeless. The state budget. The state budget for FY 2023 was passed, and it included $3.1 million for the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless that has been roughly at $3 million for the last 20 years. It also increased funding for the State Housing Voucher Program, where the governor added $1.38 million. The House added $2 more million and additional $144,000 for staff. It also, for the Department of Health, included funding for inspection staff and equipment to implement the childhood lead poisoning bill at $1.8 million. And for the Commission on Equal Opportunity, the governor added a fair housing division, which consists of 2 investigators and 1 intake officer at $186,000. And we were fortunate to protect the state low-income housing tax credit, which enables developers to create affordable housing. On the national level, there is the National Low-Income Housing Coalition House campaign that seeks to bridge the gap between incomes and housing costs by expanding rental assistance to every eligible household. So similar to food stamps or SNAP, anyone who is income eligible for a housing voucher would receive one. It also expands and preserves the supply of rental homes through the National Housing Trust Fund. And that is a trust fund that is established to help developers develop affordable housing. It would also provide emergency rental assistance to households in crisis by creating a national housing stabilization fund. So should we find ourselves in another health pandemic or any other natural disaster, we would have a national housing stabilization fund to provide renter assistance and also to look on the federal level to strengthen and enforce renter protections. So these are some things that we're advocating for on the national level. Additionally, we are also looking at the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which many of you are probably familiar with and heard of before. We want to make sure that those rental assistance funds are visible, accessible, and preventive. So visible, so that providers of rental assistance conduct equitable and robust marketing and outreach efforts to ensure that landlords and low-income renters know about the rental assistance program. Accessible, to support access and to distribute financial support to landlords and tenants by ensuring an accessible, streamlined, and low barrier application process. And preventive, to also prevent housing displacement by creating formal partnerships with local courts to support eviction prevention and eviction diversion. And DeKalb County has led the state in this effort. There's also a advocacy on the national level with the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and they're also advocating for affordable housing and expanded home ownership, including housing counseling, for $1.95 billion, and this is federal dollars, in the Home Investment Partnership Program to create and preserve affordable rental housing and affordable home ownership. $100 million for HUD's housing counseling program, $86 million for fair housing and for HUD staff capacity on fair housing. And then they also seek to increase funding in the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, or CDFI, to $1 billion and $5 billion for CDFIs and housing resources, and $4.2 billion in community development block grant funds that would come directly to those entitlement communities, such as DeKalb County, to spur equitable development and the removal of barriers to revitalization. So here is my contact information. It has indeed been an honor and a pleasure to be with you today, and I thank you for your time and your attention.
Okay, I know that was rather heavy because oftentimes we talk about the issues, but we don't talk about policy. But policy is often what drives what you see. Now, there was one House bill, in particular, the one that was presented by Viola Davis. Because what we deal with now in DeKalb County is you're seeing evictions take place. We get the calls when you see all of this stuff sitting on the curb. Now, technically, we of course provide sanitation, but that is a paid service. But what happens is, of course, the landlord, they have determined it's cheaper to allow the problem to become that of DeKalb County, rather than call and pay the pickup fee for those items. So what we tried to do was present a common sense House bill that would have allowed DeKalb County to assess a fee for the removal of those items, so that we as taxpayers don't pick up the buck, literally, for the dispossessory removal of items for land and property owners. But that was unsuccessful. So sometimes what you see is things that are common sense don't make it through. But there were several very important points. Hopefully you all, you know, what I'm doing here, you see something you really want to carry with you, just take a photo of it as it's on the monitor. But I think probably most important for us to remember out of what we've seen here was the National Low Housing Income Housed campaign. Is very important because it seeks to bridge the gap between income and housing cost by expanding rental assistance. And also for those who are watching, DeKalb County just received its third round of federal funding to assist with rental, with rentals for those who are in need. So we just received $25 million. And beginning June 22nd, if you are behind, if you will apply for those funds, then we can help you bridge the gap so that we can continue to keep people housed in place at this time. So I won't go any further into legislation, but legislation is going to be very important because we've got to do something about the huge spikes that we're seeing in rental rates. We've got to do something to cap this because our rental fees and even the cost of housing is growing faster than the GDP, gross domestic product. So you're just not able to justify what you're seeing. But from a legislative standpoint, it is a slippery slope because especially as it relates to housing, as a property owner, you have the inherent right to transfer your property. And if you're given an opportunity to receive well above fair market value, who wouldn't accept it? So this is a very slippery slope. And did you have a question?
The mother of 7 or 8 children behind her rented. We were trying to help them. I was trying to find out where do they apply for these funds?
Okay, the funds that I mentioned, the $25 million that we will begin allocating as of June 25th, it is through the program that we call TLAC, Tenant Landlord Assistance Coalition. If you will go online and Google Tenant Landlord Assistance Coalition, DeKalb County, then it will pop up. You can complete the application and that will put you in the pipeline for assistance. Any other questions? Okay, well, we're gonna move right ahead. Next we have, that has joined us. Oh, actually, we have Mr. Alfaro first. And his presentation, we're right on time. It begins at 12:15. Give My People Rest is the title of his presentation. And he has worked extensively in the development of affordable housing, and we thank you for being present.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's give her a hand, y'all. Amazing job putting this all together. I wouldn't be here without her and her team. There's at least 250,000 people that need affordable housing. It was 150,000 when my company made the calculations 3 years ago. It's only gotten worse and worse and worse. $250,000. Could you just feel that for a second? Just, even on the Zoom, could you just breathe with me? Just let that morning, just take a deep breath with me, please. It's unnerving, and it affects every aspect of life. It's actually the #1 factor in inflation, if you didn't know that. There's crime that also comes from lack of affordable housing because people can't pay their bills. How else are they going to feed themselves? There is education problems that come out of it because how could you raise your children if you, again, can't pay your bills? You're stressed, you're just pulling your hair out every day, how to move through your day. And so I'm here today to talk about what we can do together through it. So let's jump right in. And to give you, I guess, background on me, this Latin heat of a man before you. So I grew up in Chicago, and gentrification was a massive thing there. Oh, another Chicagoan here. So intimately know. Oh, you over there too? Oh, hey, family. And it was such an issue, even for me personally. My single mom, she had to struggle day to day to pay bills, right? And worse than that, every year we had to move further and further from the city. More bus routes, more trains involved, more expenses on top of the increasing rent, which inherently affected me as a child because the schooling had to change. So my inherently transient lifestyle was just kind of embedded in me. And I think all of us agree, our children deserve better. Our future generations can only do great things if we give them the environment to do great things. So I'm going to talk about the Give My People Rest topic, which is very, as you know, biblical. Even in the Old Testament, we see how God saved the Jews from the Pharaoh in a very heavy-handed way, like, hey, stop messing with my people. I want them to be free, and you're in the way of that. And I'm glad all of you are here today to make a stand. Let's make our people free and not have this affordable crisis, a housing crisis, just stand over us. So Give My People Rest, that's the 3 main points of that, by the way. Is #1, give. You have to understand what you have to give, first of all, before you can give it. The people aspect, which is what type of people you need on your team to make it happen. And then the rest aspect is an acronym, which we'll get into, of the ancillary services for a great growth housing program. So give. Understanding what you have to give is important because you don't want to just be giving your car away to somebody when you need it to get to work, right? So you have to, if you happen to be a church or a nonprofit that has a building, assessing that is part of the first part of the equation. And me as running Commonwealth, if you want to have a quick call about that, you could start down that path. I'd be glad to help because every single door unit that we could add to at affordable housing rates is going to be key. As God says, you know, I'll leave the 99 just for 1. And to get a little bit more specific on this, you just got to ask yourself the question, do you have an existing building or do you want to create a new building as part of your church? Or do you want to collaborate with us as a developer to build something new? It could be as small as a triplex, which is the only example I brought here today, but we could build a 50 unit if that's in your heart to do. There's nothing hindering us. I have access to private capital, the contractors, all the right people to make it happen. Now, what about the actual making your money back? Let's say if you wanted to invest it yourself with your church's funds and nonprofits funds, the target would be to make your money back in a few years, maximum 7 years. That would be the goal, and I will show you how all the charts, and the actual program of that works. We just follow key investment principles that have been proven decade over decade. And next, here is just a 3-unit example I mentioned before. If you're considering that, does your church have a parking lot that's maybe could be used to build a 3-unit on top of it? Or do you have an existing building where you have maybe 3 rooms that are separate from the main church? That could be used for that sort of thing. And imagine if we had 3 times 5,000 churches. That could be a massive dent in this affordable housing crisis, right? And for the existing buildings example, if you wanted to work with us, we described the kind of high level of how it would work to reduce liabilities for the church, because I know that's a major concern. So we described things like access, what sort of things should you have in the actual building, the rooms. It shouldn't be like, we're gonna give them a HD TV or anything like this. It's like the basic necessities to get them to that next level, right? To be able to study, to get that promotion, to be able to just have a place to rest their head at after a long day. Some of these folks, have 2 jobs. They're just trying to make it to the next promotion. And then this kind of talks to the financing piece. So if you wanted to finance a new building to be made, it costs between 10 to 30%, so average 20% down. But again, if you don't have that as a church, we could assist with that and be part of a partner development with you. And on top of that, there's also public-private partnerships, government subsidies, tax credits that we could share all the experience with you about. Because I'm sure day to day you aren't reading up on this sort of stuff all the time. Now, this is the typical cost for a 3-unit, a triplex, $250 to $350. And we could help you assess that cost too by going on site with you. And 3 units could be great too. Anything else? The people aspect. So there's 2 main aspects to this, the project manager and property manager. And you could collaborate with us on either one of these, but the basic qualifications you want from a project manager is somebody that knows a lot of contractors and has a lot of patience. Because I'm sure you all know it's kind of hard to find contractors that make sure they finish the job right. Nowadays, you kind of almost have to live on the property to make sure they get it done on time. So you want to make sure you have a project manager that does that. The resident screening procedures, so for vendors. So the way we work, obviously the background and credit check should be key if you're going to house people. But we'll also advise you on what the right questions are to make sure they're the right fit for your building. Want to make sure a resident is not asking or answering questions in an odd way. I actually got trained by a CIA interrogator once, and he told me kind of the tricks and trades of how to make sure somebody, when they're answering a question, if they're lying or not. That's kind of the key way you assess if somebody's going to be a great fit for where you want them to stay and your property. And then here's the property manager aspect, and this is also a matter of patience. You don't want to, as a church leader, be managing, getting calls at 2 a.m. in the morning. Hey, I lost my key to access the basement, wherever. You want to delegate that up. You as a church leader should just be focused on your church, doing the best thing, doing the Great Commission of God's will. What if my church is too small to fund this project? Again, we'll step in and we'll make it happen. Whatever, just like Pharaoh killed God killed all Pharaoh's gods, we'll get rid of anything that's in the way. We'll stop it. Get out the way. Now, what about the state laws when it comes to residents? So this is something we could also work with you on deciding too. So there's 2 main aspects. You could assign folks up as a lease tenancy or more of a license. If it's going to be more of a short-term stay, like a license will be more applicable, kind of like a hotel type situation. If you're going to have folks longer term, then we're talking more of a lease tenancy. It just depends on what your comfort level is for your church. We can help you decide on that. I've been talking a lot. Does anybody have any questions before I go into this last section? Okay, cool. Well, to go into rest, this is another key aspect, especially in Christianity, right? Jesus went out of his way to give everybody rest from illness, from ailments. Like anybody that came within his purview immediately, even if they were reaching for his little cloak, right? He wouldn't stop. He wouldn't just continue, not stop her. So we have to stop and think about the people involved in this too. You as a church should not be spending 40 hours a week on this sort of project. Again, you should be focused on, and so I highly advise hiring somebody who wants to create a new construction building on the property. Or if you want to manage an existing building, making maybe 3 units inside an existing building where there's just the beds. But going to reserves, let's say if you're renovating an existing building, what sort of things happen in the first 6 months after you renovate? We noticed when, for example, I recently renovated a duplex. Some little things just come up because inherently when you acquire a property, you miss some little details or the tenant just brought it up a few weeks after closing. But they end up being very small things. But things to look out for, like toilets need to be replaced. Maybe they're leaking. You can hear them using more water than they need to be, which can affect things over the long term, right? If you just let it happen. What about what sort of reserves should we keep? Let's say you had an existing building with 3 rooms. You rented each room at $500 a month, which is unheard of to find, right? People would absolutely need that. But what sort of reserves should you be intaking for that $1,500? We recommend about a 30%. That's what we do with our rental properties, just in case something happens with an emergency, like a leaking pipe. It could be handled out of that reserve immediately. And expenditures. So what does expenditures mean? Again, another duplex I purchased recently, the foundation we noticed was starting to kind of have a bowing effect. And my contractor said, this will probably be an issue in 5 years. You don't have to worry about it now. But a capital expenditure is, we have some extra reserves. Let's just go ahead and handle this now so it doesn't become a problem. That's what an example that is. And before I move on from expenditures, does anybody here know what cash out refinance is? Anybody? Oh, okay, somebody who's curious. Okay, so let's say your church and a church member, actually somebody told me this recently, church member decided to give a house to the church to use specifically for affordable housing. Actually gave it to the church for $1, which was pretty amazing. But basically cash out refinance means when you have equity in a home, you could use a bank to pull out equity. So let's say we have that property is worth $100,000. A bank will loan probably 80% of that. So we're talking about close to $80,000 that the bank or church could pull out from the bank and use it to do whatever else. Enhance the church, create more units. Technically, with 80,000, I could creatively tell you how to buy 3 to 5 properties, like single family homes. Or we could maybe do something more creative like the triplex, because we're talking about pretty close to that 20% mark, right? 10 to 30% down. So there's all sorts of ways to leverage cash. I'd be glad to work with all of you on that. Matter of fact, if you told me right after this, Ivan, let's meet right now, I would say, yes, clear my entire calendar. We need everything we can do right now about this. Now, what would a tenant success story look like? One of my awesome, he's like a good friend of mine now, Kenny. He was in prison for 12 years. He got out, stayed at one of kind of my rooming courthouses where I had 3 people to a house. And within a year, I'm missing a key detail. In prison, he learned how to become a certified electrician. So within 1 year of him staying here at the property, probation officer did visit him and stuff, but he was able to buy his own house in Conyers. Yeah, just gives me goosebumps every time I remember that story. And I have all dozens of that stories. If we just give people the chance. And prison, that's just another topic, right? We're talking about recidivism, that when people get a chance, we're missing that in housing too, but that's another thing we could address with this. That he was able to reunite with his family. Now he has that. Of course, this was also 2012, where you could still buy a house in Conyers reasonably. Now it's probably something like triple that. But he was able to do that. just by having a room for a year. And that's also what I want to recommend with this program. Folks just need housing technically for 6 to 12 months. If they're really focused on getting to the next level, which is kind of the final steps of this, tenant resources, focused on financial counseling, getting therapy to work through their emotions, maybe traumas like I've had in my life, they could take on board. And God has prepared us to do that. If we just have the right environment for it. Let's see. Oh yeah. So before I wrap up, yeah, these cute little ducklings. I have to just show you this because God gave me this beautiful analogy. I was leaving my office in Doraville for lunch the other day, and this lady was like, "Hey, help me! Hurt these duckies! They're about to get run over by all these cars." And of course, I stopped. I helped her. All the cars stopped. Everybody's lives stopped, and nobody was angry about it. Traffic nowadays is pretty rare, right? But it got me to thinking when I left, how many of us stop our lives to address this housing crisis that we know in our hearts it's causing serious issues? It could seriously have a life run over by not stopping our lives and doing this right now. So I'm glad that you made the decision today to say, I'm gonna stake on the ground, this is gonna be fixed. And I just want to collaborate. I'm excited to collaborate with all of you. And to wrap up, if you wanted to schedule some time with me, there's a little link to that, commonwealth.com/schedule, and we can collaborate on whatever projects together. We could have an initial call, and then from there, actually be in person and see what project you want to push forward. And whatever support you need, I'm going to be there to support you all the entire way. I know I've spoken a lot, so I know some of you are probably saying, "Praise Jesus, he's done it." Does anybody have cute questions? Okay. Looks like I did a great job like Dorian over there too then. Thanks, y'all. Have a blessed night.
Thank you so much. We have no questions, so we're going to just keep moving. The next thing we actually have, and he's already arrived on site, is Pastor Lee May. Pastor, I already read your bio. I made them aware, of course, somehow we managed to overlook in it that you served as interim CEO, that you've also been on the DeKalb County Board of Commissioners, and you have extensive knowledge in policy. But most importantly, you have a PhD in people. And one of the things that I find as an elected official, it's a beautiful thing when you care more about people than you do politics. And probably by the time DeKalb is done with me, I'll be headed to the church as well. Because it has a way of making you realize what's really important. And it's a very humbling thing though, when you deal with the issues and you concern yourself with the issues of people. So with that said, we call this the call to action. But I know not only are you on the front line here in DeKalb of working with and organizing our clergy, you're also working in Metro Atlanta. And you're doing wonderful things there. So one of the things that I wish we had present today that we don't was actual testimonials. Because we have living, breathing examples of what it looks like for our houses of worship to develop affordable housing. One of those being Greater Piney Grove. Recently, they developed a 76-unit affordable housing complex that is absolutely gorgeous, state of the art. And these are the type facilities that we need. So I'm gonna let you come up and we may be a little interactive here, but I want you to have your call to action and then we'll take questions from there.
Awesome, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your leadership throughout the county and continuing the work of the people. I know exactly how it feels and how difficult it can be to try and do right by the people. And you don't always feel like you're making a difference. I'm here to tell you, you're making a difference. So keep working, keep fighting, keep doing the business of the people, and you will win. Victory looks like for you, when the people win, that means you win, right? And so it's good to be here on this afternoon. My name is Lee May again, the pastor of Transforming Faith Church. So for those who are present, those who are watching virtually as well, thank you for being here. This is more than just an informational opportunity. It's an opportunity, you all, to do right by the people. Jesus said, I'm a Christian pastor, so my reference is Jesus. Jesus said, when you gave me food when I was hungry, when you gave me drink when I was thirsty, when you came to see about me when I was a stranger, when you came to visit me in prison, when you came to help me when I was sick, when you did that to the least of these, you did that to me. And that's what you are looking to do today. It's to bless God's people. And when you bless God's people, you bless Him. In the book of Acts, when the church was growing by gangbusters early in the church, the book of Acts, Acts chapter 6, there was an issue with the disciples who was leading God's church, right? There was an issue. People came to the disciples and said, basically, the church is growing big time, the church is doing well, but we have this particular group of people who were being neglected. It was the widows. The widows were no longer being neglected. The church was doing well. The church was growing. The church probably was bringing in all kind of resources and things like that. People were joining the church by the thousands, but the widows were going neglected. And then the disciples said something that my first time I read it, I remember I was a little bit troubled by the response. And basically the disciples said, well, am I supposed to stop preaching and teaching the gospel to wait tables? It's like, man, that's kind of rough, right? But what they were saying was, God has called us as leaders in the church to preach and teach the gospel. That issue right there is important, but we're not called to handle that in and of itself. What do? They gathered 7 men of good reputation, the Bible says, to handle that business so that they could continue the work that God had charged for them to do, while this important issue over here, maintaining and supporting the widows, was done. I look at this work just like that. I look at this as being work of the church, of the people of God. It's just like in Acts chapter 6. You heard today about challenges with affordable housing. When you look at one of the biggest drivers of this inflation after gas, I know that every day, but very closely behind is shelter, the cost to shelter. And there was an affordable housing issue before this inflation hit. So it's doubly affecting people now. This is an opportunity. I'm talking to the faith community. This is an opportunity for us to step forward and do our part in doing right by Jesus, right? By building in collaboration, in partnership, affordable housing, where the bottom line isn't just about the money, it's about the people. And so my call to action today is that you will step forward. And you may feel like those disciples, what does this have to do with me? I've been called to preach and teach. I went to seminary to preach and teach. My call by God was to preach and teach, but yet you have all of these issues that are still relevant in the world today. And my call to action for you is to step forward. You may not know how to do it. You may not understand how to do it. You may think, I can't do this at all. But I'm here to tell you, there is resources available for you. There are people waiting to partner with you. You even have more assets available to you than you even know. You have land. You may not have a whole lot of money, but you got land. You have building. You have facilities. You have a community that's ready to embrace you. So my call to action today is this. When you hear a call by Commissioner Johnson and others representing DeKalb County, step forward, even if you don't have the answers, even if you don't think you can do it. Just say yes and watch the Lord stand up and give you what you need to accomplish this goal of blessing God's people. God said you can love me, but are you loving your brothers and sisters? And the tangible things that we do each and every day are our way of showing God that we love him, but we love God's people as well, our brothers and sisters. And so when you get an email, an easy call to action is respond. I know you get 1,000 emails a day. Respond. When there's an RSVP, an email saying to confirm your attendance, click it. And I'm talking to pastors and senior leaders here virtually or online. Respond. You don't have to be the one to go. I encourage you to identify someone in your congregation that can lead this effort for the people. Call to action is to respond. And when you respond, you'll see our community change for the better. So that's all I have for you today. Respond. Step forward. Do it. Watch people be blessed. I'll share this. We have a congregation of about 118 people. But even with 118 people, we believe that we can develop massive multi-family units affordably for the people of DeKalb. And we're saying yes to the call. I'm not telling you to do something we're not ready to do. We're saying yes to the call. And with 118 people, watch our community be transformed. Watch the people be blessed. Watch more stories like Brother Ivan just told. People coming out of incarceration and having opportunities to live in affordable housing and make an affordable living and be able to buy their own house. Watch it. Watch it happen when we come together in collaboration. So with that, I want to thank you again, Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson, for your leadership.
Well, don't you go anywhere. We're not going to just have a benediction and go home. We're going to stand right there with me.
Okay.
Because, we're calling this a call to action. But many of you sitting out there may actually have questions about the process. Because what I've found is there is a willingness to develop affordable housing by the clergy. Because in many instances, as Pastor May said, you all have access to resources that a lay person would not. So you have the one word that I've learned to embrace in DeKalb County, and that word is capacity. We all don't have the same capacity. And what I've come to know, and I know you know this, is that we can't change things without partners. Now, we can talk about the issues that we have, and you know what it's like when people call you for help that you don't have. Or we can enlist individuals to help us. Now, of course, Mr. DeBarr is gone, but we even have opportunities for public-private partnerships. Now, what is a public-private partnership? DeKalb County, we're quite rich, actually. DeKalb is rich in land. It's possible that for or with the right opportunity or proposal to build or construct affordable housing, we may be able to provide the land and you provide everything else. Beyond that, we have what we call tools in the toolbox. One word you don't want to use loosely, but we have tax abatements, okay? Standing here on Board of Education soil, we have to be careful with those because tax abatements take tax dollars and they also take money away from the Board of Education. Temporarily. And that's the key, temporarily, when it's done right. But we want you to be educated. We want you to understand, if you have an interest, how we can work with you to help you, that you're not in this alone, because there is a specific process that must be followed. And again, this is not a handout, it's a hand up. Because these housing facilities earn revenue. You can charge, but what you're finding is it's a huge difference between what we're seeing happen in the marketplace, where rent is increasing 20 to 25%, and you have people that are spending well over 30% to 50% of their earnings on housing. So we need units that will help stabilize the market, that are sensible. We can be sensible and still make profit. Because one of the biggest things that I see is that we're becoming a society of haves and have-nots. And the wealth and equity gap is growing between us so greatly. And oftentimes you call the office and you say, well, what are you going to do about crime? But economic development, economic opportunity, and access will help erode that.
Yeah, that's right.
When you give folk equal access and opportunity, you know, one thing, and I'll sort of leave it after this, and if there's any questions that are coming in through the chat or wherever, I'm more than happy to answer them. But I don't know if you all realize that in the African-American community in particular, 80% of African-American wealth is directly tied to home ownership. If you do not own a home, oftentimes there is no real wealth. So as you see shifts in home ownership, you see shifts in capacity. And in many instances, it is largely along a race and class line. So I want to see all people have the right to the tree of economic opportunity, the right to home ownership. And what you're finding is, even with many of us who are in this room right now, if we were to sell our homes today, we could not afford to buy that same home if it were placed on the market for what we now consider fair market value. That's a problem. That is a problem. So if you live in DeKalb County, or I don't care where you are, if you can hear me, be cautious in selling your home. It's very difficult out there now. So when you get all these offers, and particularly too, because we have a very vulnerable population, that's our seniors.
Yes.
Because many older communities that are filled with seniors are literally under attack. All day long, they receive calls, text messages, flyers. I want to buy your home.
For cash.
For cash. I cannot tell you, you cannot sell your home. That's an inherent right as a homeowner. But if you want to sell your home, you need to enlist a qualified real estate agent. Even our real estate market is changing tremendously because we're eliminating agents. A lot of these sales are taking place direct. So they're selling because some of these folk, particularly if you are on Candler Road and you go into the Tony Valley community, you know, we are also experiencing gentrification. And I just want to be clear, you know, not everything associated with gentrification is bad. As communities gentrify, when y'all call me and say, Commissioner, I want retail, I want more restaurant, quick to say what you want. But as a general rule, when it comes to economic development, it's very simple. It's two things that's necessary. If you call anyone and say, I want your presence in my community, they only need to know the median household income within that defined area, as well as, and I say this every day, your median household income, as well as the defined area. And as soon as they know those two things, they will immediately tell you whether or not you fit their model. So for us, in many parts, particularly of South and unincorporated DeKalb, you may have the income, because when you look at Stonecrest, by and large, for African-American wealth, second only to Prince George's County, Maryland. But you don't have the critical mass, you don't have the density in homes to justify the development in many instances. So what we have to look at is how do we increase critical mass, the rooftops, so that we have both the rooftops and the density, then we can attract the industry. So if you hear me, don't always say no. Figure out how to say yes. Now, I know that this seminar today is about affordable housing, but I also want to challenge developers that are listening to understand that we all want the same thing. We don't see in many instances, Pastor, the same type developments taking place in South and unincorporated DeKalb that we see in the North. You don't see 3-story brick townhomes with rooftop pool options and outdoor kitchens. But I want that too. That's how I live.
Can I add to that?
Please.
The tallest building in Central or South DeKalb is 9 stories. And it is the jail.
DeKalb County Jail.
It is the tallest building in Central and South DeKalb. Just let that sink. Yeah. And so one of the things I want to do to help, if I can, so the call to action, it could have been considered to be, a lot of times we look at the top down. We expect the leader to be the one of the organization, of the church, of the synagogue, of the mosque, to be the one to guide. But I also want you all who are here in person and online to, maybe you start the work in your local organization or congregation, and you take it to your pastor and say, I want us to develop affordable housing, and I believe I can point us in the right direction, right? Not saying that you know how to do it, but you can help point. And all you're doing is pointing them to the commissioner, pointing them to DeKalb County, pointing them to the partners that can come alongside. So if it's not coming from the top down, and a lot of times, the leaders of these congregations, they want to. I've sat with many pastors of some of the largest churches in DeKalb and the Atlanta metro area, talking to them about affordable housing. And they have a vision to it. It's in their master plan, Commissioner. They've talked about it, their strategic plan, but it typically falls to the wayside because they don't think that they can afford it, and it's not the highest priority at the time, and it's all because they don't think they can accomplish it. But we're here to say it can be done. It can be done quicker than you believe. It can be done with less money than you think. It can be done. And here's the last kicker. It can be done and the church can make money from it as well. I know we don't want to talk about that, but the church can benefit financially from providing affordable housing. It's been proven. It's been proven. Many of these churches that have been doing it, that the commissioner has named, they're making real money that's benefiting their church. And so maybe that's an incentive. There's a question online.
Absolutely. I was just looking, Mr. Curtis Welgen, thank you for joining us. He said, so who are the developing partners who are willing to build affordable housing in DeKalb County? Now that is the question. That's the question.
We got one brother back here raised his hand.
We have one that has raised his hand, but that's exactly what we need. One of the things that I found as an elected official is that people come to government for what they can't provide for themselves. But technically, government is only in the business of providing essential services: water, sanitation, public safety, roads and drainage. We are not in the business of housing. We are not in the business of housing. I'm going to say that a third time. DeKalb County is not in the business of housing. It takes partners and it takes developers. And I'm absolutely sometimes at an absolute loss as to why I don't see us do more. Even when it comes to restaurants, retail, and small businesses. In many instances, we have not because we own not. With franchises, every year, I'm one of the co-sponsors of the Franchise Expo. 85% of franchises are located within a 5-mile radius of the home of the franchisee. Why do you think folk are going to bring into your community their business and drive outside and go home? It's time we have a different conversation not only about housing, but about economic development and what we want to look like and the role we play in it. So DeKalb County, we have a variety of different types of loan products. We have everything from an ACE loan, which goes up to $250,000. We have a 108 revolving loan, which goes up to $3 million. We have SBA loans, which can be rather infinite. We have CDBG funds, community development block grants that can go up to 300 million. We have the resources. We need you. Will you come? Are you willing to engage with us to help solve the problem? And I have to share this because I like giving credit where it's due, because in government, that don't happen a lot. Okay?
Cut ribbons on the work you did.
Cut ribbon, and you didn't even get the memo to show up.
But to be fair, I cut ribbons and I didn't do the work also. It's kind of, it balances out, right?
Yeah, I'll receive it all, but, I remember when you came to me, and it had been 2 years ago now, with Court Wall. Share this story. And this gentleman sat down and he said, hey, I'm interested in bringing a restaurant to your district. And I said, wonderful. As long as it's not chicken, fried rice, or burger. So he said, well, what is it you want? So we talked about the location. And of course, DeKalb County has a comprehensive zoning plan. The zoning plan should dictate what is developed there. If you want something that is outside the comprehensive plan, you come to us for a slump.
Special land use permit. I still remember that.
That's right, special land use permit. And if we believe that you are decent and in order and it's worthwhile, then with a vote of 4, you get it. So he needed a slump. So I said, well, now, as long as it ain't burger, fries, or fried rice, what I would like to see is a Chipotle, a Starbucks.
Yes.
I gave him some options, and he gave me exactly what I asked. We've got to do a better job of asking.
That's right.
So if we don't move this ball down the field, I don't want it to be because I, as your commissioner, understanding the need, didn't do everything I could to block as you run. Okay? So with that said, we are now in the asking business. I'm asking you all to partner with us. I believe CEO and the entire administration supports this ask because we all understand we're on the front line of the need. So at this point, let's see, are there any other questions? Leah, if you can scroll back.
One of the questions was, were we talking about rental, these developments, were they rental properties? Scroll up a little bit.
Oh, yes. Leah, if on the feed of questions, there was one question as to whether or not the affordable housing units we're talking about would be rentals or for sale.
And the possibility of lease to own.
And possibility of lease to own. Yeah, if you will, please grab your own mic. I don't want to give you mine because I got a lot to say. It can be one of any of the 3. Let's be very clear on that. Here in DeKalb County, the largest rental owner is actually a company by the name of Promise Homes that was owned by John O'Brien, and John recently sold it after taking it to the New York Stock Exchange. And Promise Homes does a rent-to-own opportunity for low to moderate income families. And actually, I stand here, and this is almost an oxymoron, because that company was birthed in 2008 during the housing crisis downsurge. This gentleman purchased over 400 properties in DeKalb County. Over 400, converted them into affordable housing units and transitioned in families in a rent-to-own capacity. So that is a possibility. Even as it relates to rentals, there are a lot of people, because, our generation, we wanted to own. And we thought a single family home was the way to go. But you're finding more and more, these millennials and newer generations, they like townhomes, condominiums. But then you have an entire segment who has a mentality that it ain't a home if it's not a single family. We're not where we used to be, everybody. We're not where we used to be, and you can't say no to everything. Work with developers to create a quality product that enhances your property value, that enhances the community, that's good for everyone that's involved in the process. And feel free to join in.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. My company, we focus on the rental side. So renting it at affordable rates using the peak investment principles. So when you come to wanting to buy a house, we could refer you to other organizations we work with for that.
I don't know if the virtual audience.
Oh, gosh. Okay, I guess you give me your microphone after all. Thank you, Commissioner. So I was just saying that we focus on the rental side, but if you want to, after this, let's say that's 6 to 12 months, want to buy a property, we could assist you with that with the organizations we work with also.
So one of the questions on the online was someone had an issue with me saying the church can make money from affordable housing.
And if I might, I'm going to read the exact question because I want us to be specific. Church making a profit of housing may endanger their tax exempt status. The housing collapse of 2008 bankrupted how many banks? What would happen to the churches when the market collapses again?
So that's a really good question, And so I want to clarify when I said make money. I'm not talking about making money in the corporate sense of these corporations, because one of the challenges with capitalism, as we know, is that companies are in business to make money for their shareholders. You are a church. Your business is making life better for the people, right? And so there's a difference. And so, but the first thing that we would be talking about in churches, we're not talking about churches directly building affordable housing. We're actually talking about a church entity creating another separate entity that would take on that business. That would be legally separate from that. That would be arm's length distance. And so if something does go wrong, because when you get involved with businesses or activities like this, there could go wrong. It will not adversely affect the church because it will be two separate entities. It will be a community development corporation. We've developed one at our church, and so it's separate from our church as an entity.
Yeah, to add to that, there's two things. Number one, during the 2008 crash, multifamilies were actually largely not affected by it because cash flow just kept coming in, right? People always need a place to stay. And then number two, I think it makes me think of like saving lives as a primary goal of the church. And this has a capacity to do greater and greater things. One example I think of is when I toured back my home country of Chicago, I realized one of the skyscrapers was actually owned by the Catholic Church. And they decided, instead of selling this thing, we're just gonna take the bottom floor and the top floor. The rest of it, we're gonna rent out, and we're gonna give all the proceeds to the surrounding churches, organizations. We're talking about, I don't know, 80 floors, right? So what's the effectiveness of that? Being able for the church to, have a direct hand on a monthly basis, literally, because you're getting that rent in downtown. That's just one example of how powerful it can be to rent for a church.
And more money coming into the church is more money that they can use to bless people. So it's not a profit that I'm talking about. If you notice, I didn't use the word profit. I said make money, and that money should be circulated back in to bless people.
Yes, and Pastor, I see you have a question for us.
My question is, church creates the second or third Bible. If the church named something totally different, so that it's not associated with the church, that part of its name, so that we can recognize
Understood. The question was, if a church decides to pursue the construction of affordable housing, should the church construct the organization in its current name so that individuals will recognize it as being the force behind the development, or should it be done totally separate without any relationship to the church
Can I answer
itself?
that as well?
Yes.
What we've been advised is that the name should be totally different because developers, investors and so forth do not want the name to get the back if the church is name associated.
So what I found is that number one, it should be a separate name, but two, churches have kind of split the baby. It's a separate name, and so I won't say a specific church name. So say it's the Church of Christ, general. The Church of Christ Community Development Corporation would be its name, or it will be a subset of that name. Example of ours, our name of our church is Transforming Faith Church. Our CDC is Transforming CDC. So it's close enough. Even some of the branding looks alike, but it's completely separate. Separate board, separate bylaws, all of that. And you got to keep the two separate, and people help navigate you.
Yes, and I'll say that when you're qualified, you're qualified. The name won't have anything to do with qualification, but for legal purposes, the separation of the two entities and they're operating totally independent of each other is what's necessary. So I wouldn't say that if I've been Transforming Faith Church, I may be Transforming Faith Community Development. And anybody that doesn't want to live to me because of my name, that's a problem. Shame on them. But when you're qualified and your business and your paperwork is in order, you'll be fine. Because we're not here to take you down a rabbit hole or do anything that's illegal, anything that's out of order. We just want you to understand the process if you care to work through it. And was there another question?
I did. Well, first I would like to say this is awesome information. A lot of good information. It's actually very motivating. You know what I mean? Because I think we were talking about as a church, we do have to come outside of the wall. So we're gonna have to do stuff. But anyway, my question is like, how do we get started? When is the next? Okay, we got this information. What's next?
Oh, that's a very good question. You got the information. What's next? Okay, to repeat the question, we had one of those that are in-house with us ask. We've gotten the information. We believe we've received good information. We're excited. We want to help. What's next? Next, we will have a series of technical workshops to walk you through the process. So if you want to set up a separate entity, we will have individuals who can explain and walk you through the process so that you know how to go about doing it. Because that's the first step. You have to have a separate entity. This can't be done through the church, although many of you that have joined us are members of the clergy. Once you have completed that step, then determining the location, the amount of units based upon the investment, that will be phase 2. And that will be a very personalized approach because no two entities in here would have the same assets nor aspirations. So you will continue to receive emails from us. We will make these workshops as technical as necessary. Of course, we'll bring in individuals from the county, Mr. Alan Mitchell. He works very extensively with our community development block grants. So he understands how things must be formatted. He understands how to take a look at the land, its value to determine what that asset brings to the table. Also, we have planning and zoning who will work with you because depending on the size of the land lot, it will dictate the number of units that may be possible. Okay? If there is a necessity to change zoning, to increase density so that you are able to build at a certain capacity. So it is a process. And on average, I'm told by the churches who have gone through the process that it takes 2 to 3 years.
That's my part.
And so I've answered part B. And for me, that's scary because there's such an imminent need right now. And I'm standing here saying we're 2 to 3 years off from help, even if you wanted to begin the process today. Yes, ma'am?
However, I wanted to ask a question, which you asked me about that before. I wanted to ask Mr. Alfaro a question in reference to the construction part. With the high cost of construction materials, how likely is it to get a project started or to accomplish one for $250,000?
Oh, yeah, so she asked, how realistic is it with the current market of high construction costs, labor shortages, to be able to get projects done? And for example, the 250,000 to 350,000 triplex. Since I've developed so many relationships over the years, over the last 10 plus years, I can still get it done. It's kind of I feel the smaller guys that are just getting into the game that are having more trouble because they haven't developed the relationships right. So yeah, it's feasible. And I think if you want to start off with existing building, to your point, it can be faster because we're working with existing square footage as opposed to starting something new. But yes, bigger multifamily is going to take more time, potentially rezoning, but it'll still be worth it. So if you want to take on a small project in the short term or a bigger project in the long term, all of it is needed. And we'll be glad to work with you on all of it.
Yes, ma'am, go right ahead. Thanks, JP.
I have a 2-point question. I have a 2-point question, 2-part question. Is there any way to fast track the 2 to 3 years? And the second part would be, is there a deadline for applying for a grant funding?
Okay, the question was, is there any way to fast track the 2 to 3 year process so that you're moving faster? And is there a deadline for the funding? DeKalb County always has funding. We as a county. Now that doesn't mean you choose to utilize DeKalb County. You may not, depending on what resources are out there. But as a general rule, we are going to be amongst the most competitive in terms of interest rate that you're going to find in the marketplace. In terms of fast tracking, I give you what's a general benchmark, but for everyone, the process can be different. If you have your ducks in a row, some of you may already have a separate entity that's ready to go. So you're going to circumvent that process. So that means you've already saved some time. It really all depends. Things can be done in less time, but as a general rule, and Pastor Reverend Dr. Flippin, he often laughs and said it was 10 years for him because he had the vision and it took him 5 to begin to think it after he had the vision to put it to action. And then one day he woke up and said, well, today is the day I'm going to really get started. So it's different for everyone. But I always say diligence. Just work diligently, complete the process. And oftentimes, one of the major keys is who you have around you. If you have a team that's moving the ball down the field, then you'll get to the finish line quicker. You'll get to the end zone quicker.
And can I add to that as well? My daughter, my oldest, is 15 years old. She was just 5, y'all. She was 5 yesterday, I promise you. She was 5 yesterday. Time is gonna go by faster than you think. I would recommend just getting your mind that it's gonna take at least 3 years, right? Number one, because you don't wanna skip the process. You don't wanna bypass it. You don't wanna hurry through things because you wanna get it right the first time, right? And make sure that you're going through the steps. And the reality is that you wanna be able to use less of your money, and the less of your money that you use means that many of these programming, some of them are competitive, some of them take, a level of qualification to compliance that it just takes time. Like, for example, if you already have a CDC, a separate entity, make sure that you're getting your books audited every year. Because there's some programs you won't get the funding or the tax abatement, tax credits and things if you don't have 3 years of audited financials, right? It's certain programs. So I would say certain things you have to make sure you're doing and making sure you're not rushing.
Okay, so I have another question based on that. So we recently got our CDC. We wouldn't have 3 years worth of auditing at this point? So do we go back to the original entity and on those three, or how does that play?
No. So you don't stop. You know, first of all, you need to make sure you have professionals around you to give you that advice. I couldn't give you that advice, but I wouldn't say to go back and forth based upon, you have to make that decision for yourself. We just know that some of the programs, they would almost require you to have a separate entity from the church. And for liability issues, it might be wise.
And I don't think that would make you go back. You start from where you are, just as you're moving forward. Make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. I don't think in this marketing will preclude you or keep you out. And Leah, I see there's more questions. Can you go backwards on the chat so that you know, I'm going to take just another minute or two. We're going to run over about 30 minutes. We said we would be done at 1, and it's 1:17. Okay, well, if that's the case, I think unless there's any more questions here, yes, ma'am.
I have a question about what have a separate entity already, which have no money. That be addressed on the services.
Absolutely.
You'll find a lot of people have some kind of asset that they don't realize is an asset. You got an entity, no money. You don't have an entity, but you got land. You don't have an entity, but you have property, you know, and there's an asset. You take advantage of where you are with your assets.
And I just want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for coming out. We all identify the issue, and people that are in this room and those who are watching can be a part of the solution. As I said, DeKalb County government is not in the business of housing. That's just plain and simply not what we do. So if we're going to stop what we see, I need folk like you. I need you to pray about this. I need you to think through it. And we're here to put wise people around you from DeKalb County who can assist you with moving through the process. It's really time, you know, and it's always amazing to me because I'm very capitalistic in thought. Most folk are. But what we're seeing has become egregious. What we're seeing has become egregious. So as you're building this housing, I call it development of conscious communities. Consciously charge people what is fair. Because a lot of what we're seeing right now in the marketplace, it is not fair. And we don't have to do this. But unless we have individuals that consciously enter the marketplace for the right reason, who can afford to develop, who can afford to pass on units at a fair market value, then we're going to see some serious problems in the next 2 to 3 years. So thank you all for coming. We will make sure that this entire presentation is available to you. I want to apologize ahead of time for the audio. I thought being at this particular building would be the best place for us. But again, I do recognize that we've had some audio issues here today, and for that I do apologize. But thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.